Jack.
Levi.
The Book Club from Hell.
Hello everyone, this is Jack with the Book Club from Hell, an SE5-enabled paramilitary organisation hellbent on getting sponsored by Peter Thiel so that we can buy even more SE5s. Alexander Dugin is a Russian philosopher and political theorist, one-time advisor to the Speaker of Russia's Duma, a long-time supporter of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, possible influence on President Vladimir Putin, and the target of a car bombing in 2022 which failed to kill him but killed his daughter. Born in Moscow in 1962, details on Dugin's younger years are hazy. Whether because of links to the Soviet intelligence services or by other means, Dugin studied Julius Evola and René Guénon's writings at the Lenin State Library, also becoming part of the Yuzhinsky Circle, a dissident group who mixed and matched Satanism, Nazism, and the occult. For this episode, Levi and I read Dugin's The Fourth Political Theory, published in 2009. This book is both a call to action and a blueprint for developing a political theory to challenge and replace liberalism. Liberalism being a political theory which has, in Dugin's telling, become unopposed and, in being unopposed, become totalising, universalising and inescapable, transforming into a rhizomal morass of post-liberalism without any vertical orientation. For the most part, this book represents a list of things that the fourth political theory won't be, rather than offering a firm explanation of what it is, although there are a few specifics. It's strongly anti-Western, particularly anti-American. He loves Martin Heidegger and shoehorns Dasein into anything he can. He's all about cultural relativism and national self-determination, except for when it comes to Ukraine. All in all, I expected the anti-Western invectives, but I never anticipated that this book would get as weird as it does. So, friends, prepare yourselves for some continental philosophy word salad, and enjoy. Dugin belongs to a group of philosophers that I've come to think of as why philosophers, in that they're people who build up these intellectual edifices which come crumbling down as soon as you ask, okay, why? So
Yeah,
Evola,
please explain.
Evola is maybe the best example of this, in that as we said in the Evola episodes we've done, he builds up this system which is internally fairly consistent, but based upon these handful of huge assumptions. And as soon as you look at one of the assumptions and go, okay, why? Nothing works. Like it just falls over.
This is why I think Pauline Hanson is the greatest of modern philosophers. Please explain.
Please explain.
Please explain. Please explain. If you just throw Pauline
the
Hanson
reincarnation of Socrates. It's just the Socratic method.
Into global geopolitics and philosophical debates, she just run around Europe just going, please explain. Deleuze, please explain. Dugin, please explain. Yeah.
Pauline Hanson just develops this reputation of being an absolute bulldozer in the philosophical world, just steamrolling people's philosophical systems. She's Socrates 2.0. Saint Socrates of Queensland.
Saint Socrates of Queensland, yeah. With that caveat, I was kind of interested early on when he started criticizing liberalism because... Well, obviously, I'm in a Western, like I've grown up in a Western setting. So probably some of the things in liberalism or whatever I perhaps take for granted, plus my readings of liberal philosophers over the years has shaped sort of like the way that I think about things. So I was actually kind of looking forward to reading somebody from like quite a different background, in this case, Russian military or something. His family was in like the Russian secret services or something like that. Yeah, so I was looking forward to reading it, and he even mentioned one of the books that I love, The Open Society and Its Enemies by Karl Popper. He sort of mentioned it.
He complains about it a lot.
He gave it like one sentence early on the book, and I didn't feel as though he ever actually like directly. He just sort of like said, "Oh well, I disagree with this," but it didn't seem as though he actually sort of substantively spoke about the things in that book. Whereas he brought up some other other so-called like liberal philosophers, like this one guy in
like
particular,
Ayn
Spencer.
Rand.
Spencer.
At one point, he was talking about how liberalism is fundamentally greedy and believes in the strong preying on the weak, and uses as an example Ayn Rand, as a representative of mainstream liberal opinion.
And some guy named Spencer, Herbert Spencer or something, who seems his representation is a social Darwinist, and then he's like, well, this is all liberalism. It's like, and that's when it became pretty clear.
Granted, Spencer was very popular
back in,
but
like maybe back when Dugin was studying or something.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember when Spencer wrote, but he was a social Darwinist. He was quite popular, but his popularity has waned significantly to the point where basically no one in the past few decades has really paid him any attention.
So I was suspicious of that characterization of liberalism in terms of like this one political philosopher, because I was like, I've never heard of this guy. He's got views. If he's a social Darwinist, like those are extremely outdated views and they're wrong. But this is being represented as like, this is what Western philosophy is about. And so I think I got this immediate sense early in the book that a big chunk of it is propaganda.
Yeah, or at least propaganda adjacent. And when we start talking about his view of racism, which I'm sure we will, that to me felt like pure propaganda, because he basically stretches the definition of racism to mean anything he doesn't like in the West. And I have a feeling that he's doing it because he knows that a lot of Westerners get very sensitive about being called racist.
Yeah, like economic racism.
Yeah, fashion racism.
Yeah.
Anyway. He starts sounding like a real social justice warrior in that part, because everything he doesn't like is racism. I was expecting to see pictures of Alexander Dugin with like dyed purple hair, wearing horn-rimmed pink glasses or something like that after his racism tirade, and then after learning that he's an avowed cultural relativist as well.
Yeah, that spun my head through a bit of a loop as well.
That, at least, it was fairly consistent with the rest of his beliefs.
So, when in open-minded throughout the book, I got pretty sick of it. And
yeah, that's about my experience.
Yeah. But having said that, occasionally there were parts where I was like, oh, that's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
And
I'm glad I've read it, actually, because look, it's hard to say to what extent Dugin's beliefs shape Russian state policy, whether he actually writes things and then Vladimir Putin reads them or talks to Dugin and bases his decisions on that, or whether United Russia has already got a series of views that happen to coincide with Alexander Dugin's thought and just keep him around as sort of an intellectual fig leaf justifying their behaviour. I'm not sure, but he is representative of a strain of thought in Russia.
He was at one point, if you have a quick read of his biography, he was the advisor to the fourth highest political position. It's like not chairman of the, what is it? It's like
I think is he still in the Duma?
Yeah, it's almost like it's like the speaker of the Duma sort of position. I think he was like the fourth. Mm-hmm. Is the advisor to one of the most powerful people in the country. So that's pretty significant. I don't know what his current position is, if he holds any. And he was also like a professor at like one of the major universities in Moscow. So he's obviously somewhat influential, but obviously it's like a large country, right? So, you know.
Well, influential, but it's to what extent is he influential on people who actually make decisions?
True.
And that's unclear. He has been calling for a war in Ukraine for a long time. So, whether he got his wish because he was pushing for it, or his interests or his desires and those of Vladimir Putin's happened to coincide, I'm not sure. But at least what he is describing is a worldview shared by at least some Russians with power. So I'm happy I've read this book. However, I think people could probably just read excerpts of it and get the general idea quickly. I don't think reading this whole book's necessary.
No.
I'd be interested also to read a more recent book of his, because this is more than 10 years old now.
Yeah, and he's written some more recent stuff.
He's written a lot.
What did I learn from him? Not sure yet. Still thinking about it. Not sure that I agree with a single piece of what he said, but so what problem?
I think some of his criticisms of liberalism are justified. That's also if I'm being very generous to him.
One of those things where sometimes it can contain some elements of truth, but in the context of the overall philosophy and worldview is extremely distorted and also seems like just convenient. It's like when the truth is, or when something that seems reasonable is convenient, he'll talk about it. But a lot of the time it's just like he's off the fucking deep end.
It's especially the middle part of this book. It was such fucking hard work because the translation was terrible, and it's just him talking about Dasein, but poorly translated. Fortunately, actually, because I'm assuming Russian has a similar sentence structure to Czech, I felt like I could understand plenty of it by just thinking about how these sorts of things would be written in Czech, and then it made much more sense. But that's still a pretty bad reader experience.
Yeah, well, for me, some parts of it just didn't make any sense. Like, not criticizing his philosophy, but literally the sentence structure is just, this is a nonsense sentence.
Yeah, when I was reading it, I thought, yeah, this is just Slavlish.
Yeah, exactly. So, forgiving that there's something lost in the translation. That's not his fault. But there were definitely some parts that seem to have been translated fairly well. And
there's plenty of it that's definitely his fault.
And it's 100% his fault. He's a true Hegelian. But I will give him credit for making me more interested in reading Heidegger and
this made me want to read
Husserl and Heidegger. Is that how you say Husserl?
Yeah.
Husserl.
Husserl, I don't know.
Husserl and Heidegger. Yeah, I want to read those two, maybe on this podcast. Not because I think that they seem as though they're true. It's just they seem to be referenced a lot by a certain type of philosopher. Dasein's come up a number of times.
Yeah, although I think Being in Time is something like 600 pages of the most turgid prose you can imagine. That would be harder than anything we've ever done.
Seriously horrible. There's people who spend like their whole life. I was reading this one comment on Reddit or something. Where was it? I can't remember. Where this guy was saying he spent 3 years reading Heidegger and somebody else for his master's thesis or whatever. And he says, like, took me 3 years to understand. I'm like, maybe it took you 3 years to understand, or maybe it just took you 3 years to like brainwash yourself into thinking that they were actually saying anything.
When I hear that it took someone 3 years to understand something like that, my first impulse is to think, well, it's probably poorly written. This sounds more like a communication problem than a problem with the complexity of the ideas. I just don't accept that, it's going to take that long of dedicated study to really understand something.
You could study 3 years very hard in an undergraduate degree and get a physics major with like subjects in quantum mechanics and stuff in 3 years. So you can cover a shitload of ground in 3 years if you have like the pedagogical support. So the idea that it takes you 3 years to understand shit that Martin Heidegger's saying is, I find it, I'm incredulous that that's actually containing anything useful. I think it might be confusion ray philosophy.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's not a question of pedagogical support. It's a question of the base text just being, I don't know if he was being intentionally obscure, but
seems as though a lot of these writers have contempt for their reader. I certainly felt like that with Dugin at times. So I know you're better than me. Fucking hell. Hurry up, stop being so like weird with your writing. Just say something.
All right. So what is the basic premise of the fourth political theory by Alexander Dugin?
So I'm going to be honest, man.
Because this book is part of a project.
I don't think I fully understood this fucking book. Maybe it's just too much confusionary philosophy for me. There were aspects of it where he referenced his own work and a lot of background knowledge. So coming into it, not being familiar with a lot of the stuff that he talks about, just left me, having to like catch up with basics or make guesstimates about what I think he's saying. But then there's also another aspect of it where I was literally like, okay, even if I think I have a good sort of estimation of roughly what he's talking about, some of the things he's saying is just complete nonsense. And so I walked away from it being like, okay, you don't like liberalism. You want to overthrow liberalism, but like, what are we doing here?
Well, the point is that the fourth political theory is as yet unformed. So in his telling, within modernity, there were three political theories. The first is liberalism, the second is communism, the third is fascism. What he is setting out to do, and this is on the basis of other people's work, for example, Alain de Benoit's work.
Have you read any of de Benoit's
He
work?
wants to create a fourth political theory that can transcend post-modernity, which is the state that occurs after modernity, as you might have etymologically guessed.
Nah.
Where liberalism has won. Liberalism's defeated the other two.
Not if time is cyclical. Maybe post-modernity is before modernity. And in so doing, post-modernity gives
we can get into
time and being modernity itself.
Yeah, we can go into how Dugin regards time, because he seems to think that you almost will this cyclical time into being.
Well, I'm pretty sure he did it. That's what he does think. I think that's exactly what he thinks.
When I say I think, it's because a lot of this book is fairly unclear when it gets more metaphysical.
Yeah, no, I think he... Well, yeah, again, same qualifier. What I decided with the time stuff is he actually did, in fact... He was saying that a culture could control time, especially essentially... like the linearity or cyclical nature of time within. So I wrote in my book chronological relativism. That's how deep his
and conversely, you destroy time if you're a postmodernist.
His ethno relativism is so deep it goes all the way down to time.
He's a physical relativist.
Yeah, which I think if you believe in that sort of stuff, like you're just living in like a fucking nutcase of a universe. If you think that like entire ethnicities can like manipulate time and space independently of one another, and then like their physical bodies interact, but their timelines are like disjointed, that you're just a fucking crazy person. And the fact that this guy was advising to people in the Kremlin is just a sign that like those people who are being advised to got very, very, very bad advice.
I mean, considering how badly the Russian military has fucked the war in Ukraine, that might say something about the quality of the advice they've been getting.
I mean, when I was thinking about it, as I was reading his book, I thought, okay, how influential is Dugin in Russian politics? Some people think he's more influential than others. Just sort of like depends. Maybe he's a little bit more influential 10 or 15 years ago. But I thought the more influence this particular person had, the more like degenerate the intellectual capacity of whoever he was advising. Like this sort of philosophy makes people dumb because the ideas are just so bad.
Yeah, it's sort of like hooking up the sewage system to your drinking water and saying it tastes great. The more of it you're getting, the more shit you're drinking.
Yeah, so in a weird way, I was a little bit like, I hope he's had I was self-motivated into kind of hoping that he's had a bigger influence.
No, I hope he has a small influence, because I'd much prefer it if Russia were,
yeah,
especially given where I live, that Russia were more a country led by more sensible people.
Yeah, true. I'm being too short-sighted there. High time preference, motherfucker. I'm inclined to You've gotten the better of me, Jack. I'm inclined to agree.
Like, living in Czech Republic, it's great
but then again,
that
I'm
Germans
not right next to
are
Russia.
now behaving themselves. Now all that needs to happen is for Russians to start behaving themselves.
That is true. I'm not sandwiched between Russia and Germany.
There's a reason why this part of the world's been just
That's a bad habit of getting
occupied.
bombed into the ground historically in that part of the world.
Yeah, it's a pretty bad neighborhood, actually.
Yeah. No, fair enough. I can see why you'd be more interested in Vlad being a little more sensible. I won't egg on Dugin. Just reach out to him on Twitter like, hey, mate, write another book.
I love your work, man. Want to come on the podcast? So, what I was saying earlier about what the fourth political theory is it's not actually a defined theory yet. What this entire book is Dugin providing, first, the motivation for coming up with a fourth political theory, so a theory that transcends the three modernist theories, and particularly one that will overthrow liberalism and post-liberalism. And he sketches out aspects of this new ideology or post-ideology that are important to have and are necessary and will allow it both to overthrow liberalism or post-liberalism and institute something totally new in its place. That's the book. It really is to provide people who will later come up with the fourth political theory with an intellectual framework with which they can do that. And I've made a list of things that are to be features of the fourth political theory, and maybe we can, to an extent, use that as a structure for this episode. But before we go into the features of the fourth political theory, we should probably describe his motivations for wanting a fourth political theory in the first place, particularly his issues with liberalism, with the unipolar American-led world order, and things like that. To you, I imagine our audience is pretty well acquainted with liberalism. Dugin certainly takes the least charitable view of liberalism possible, to the point where I'm not sure he truly understands liberalism, and certainly doesn't understand what life is like in the West. That was a fairly glaring error.
Do you think he potentially hasn't actually spent that much time outside of Russia?
I'm not sure. I don't know what his travel plans
I
have
wouldn't
been in the past.
expect you
It would
to,
surprise me if
he'd
he'd
unreasonable
never
question. Jack, why don't you have the man's fucking schedules, calendar, know about which country he's been to, favourite foods? Come on, man.
Given that he is part of, or he's linked with groups in Europe, say anti-EU groups, anti-Atlanticist groups, it wouldn't surprise me if he'd given talks within the EU, but I'm not sure. How about we describe the situation that Dugin says we're currently in, and hence why we need to develop a fourth political theory? Because he has a fairly... his definition of liberalism versus post-liberalism, modernity versus post-modernity, tends to be fairly stable. Unlike some of his other definitions in this book, that one actually tends to stand still. So what he says is that modernity, this post-Enlightenment time, has been dominated by three ideologies predominantly, and this really came to a head in the 20th century, which he says was the century of ideology, in that it was this, instead of people's lives being governed by race, caste, ethnos, nationality, by feudal estates, land rights, things like that. Instead, it was these land agnostic, ethnos agnostic ideologies that spread over the world in the 20th century and really defined people's experiences during that time.
What do you think of that idea? I thought that was an interesting idea.
I think it's an interesting idea, but it's not as cut and dry as that.
No, obviously not. Because, a lot of them, the First World War, for example, was almost empires, and then the Second World War more being about nation states. But then,
or ideology. I do think ideologies had a bigger role to play in the Second World War.
Oh yeah, for sure. But I was just saying, those nation states, were aligned on. Not entirely, fairly well aligned on ideologically, except I suppose the Russians. Hey, being a part of the
Well, it's a lot
Allies.
more complex than that
Yeah.
because, for example, Dugin doesn't quite bring this up, that initially the Nazis and the communists in Russia cooperated. Like Poland wasn't divided between, say, a liberal group and fascists. It was divided between Nazi Germany and communist Russia.
Yeah.
I think it was the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, where they agreed to divide up Poland. It wasn't as straightforward as Dugin makes it out to be, but it is an interesting starting point for thinking of perhaps a more historically accurate description of the 20th century, where ideologies were more important in that century than they had been previously.
I guess what like there's like a nation state identity in itself is an ideology.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess what I was interpreting his use of the word ideology is kind of like these ideology that transcended like group affiliations. So whether it's tribal or ethnos or like nation state, there was something of like being a liberal. Oh well, the UK is liberal, Australia's liberal, the United States is liberal.
Interestingly, though, and we'll get into his view of relativism later in the episode because it's really important. I'm not sure how this sits beside his cultural relativism and it's almost like Oswald Spengler, his view that different cultures and civilizations can never truly understand each other and can never truly use the products of each other's thought. If that is the case, and he regularly talks about how liberalism it's not merely Western European, but it's Anglo-Saxon, and therefore it's something that fundamentally can't be understood by other groups, by another ethnos. In that case, I'm not sure actually how ideologies would spread, because wouldn't you then say wherever the ideology was first conceived of, that's the only ethnos that can actually understand it, and the only place where it can really be an organising principle, where it can be truly implemented. This is the first of a very large number of inconsistencies in Dugin's thought. Maybe he does clarify this in other books. Maybe the translation makes it harder to understand how this is resolved. Maybe I'm just dumb. But at least in my reading, his idea of ideology as something that can sit above nation or across different affiliations, and his idea of almost ethnos exclusivity, those two things don't sit with each other.
No, well, I think there's lots of inconsistencies in the book, but that's one fairly very large important one to make note of. Yeah, so
anyway,
did
20th
you get
century.
A sense of why in particular he doesn't like liberalism?
I think he doesn't like liberalism because the United States is the big kid on the block, and he wants Russia to be the big kid on the block, and the United States is a liberal country, and therefore he doesn't like it. This is a very uncharitable interpretation, but I think it's a lot of motivated reasoning because he wishes Russia were more powerful. So with liberalism, once the Soviet Union fell, was it 91? I think it was 91 when it completely fell apart. You'd had revolutions before that of satellite states and also states that were formerly part of the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union itself fell. Russian communism fell in 91. And Dugin says when this happened, liberalism became unopposed. And in becoming unopposed, it moved from being an ideology. So in theory, during the 20th century, you could choose between different ideologies. You had these three options available to you. Not as straightforward as he makes it out to be, but I guess you could say, okay, in the interiority of your mind, if you were living in Nazi Germany, you could be a communist. You just couldn't tell anyone or you'd be killed. But he said with the fall of the Soviet Union, with the fall of the communist counterweight to Western liberalism, liberalism became the only option available to you. And again, well, is another problem that if you acknowledge that within your mind you could be a communist within liberalism, a liberal country in the 20th century. You could be a fascist within the Soviet Union in your mind in the 20th century. Why can't you just be a fascist or a communist in your mind during the 21st century when apparently liberalism is so dominant that it has become universal, a lifestyle? It's moved from an ideology to a post-ideology because it's no longer a system of thought, but it's a mode of being, something so absolute because it's unopposed. I don't understand how this transition between liberalism in the 20th century and 21st century post-liberalism without any ideological opponent really occurs.
No, well,
it's an interesting idea, but I don't understand the mechanism.
He doesn't actually explain. He just says that is the case. Without actually explaining further. And one of the things is like in a liberal country, it depends which country exactly, with some caveats on what I'm about to say, but you can just be a Marxist if you want. In Australia, there's plenty of Marxists. And you can be a fascist as well. I mean, you won't make many friends, but you're legally allowed to be. And whereas in Nazi Germany, you weren't legally allowed to be a communist. And you know what? Also, there were times when like America strayed away from like the core foundational philosophical views of liberalism, like in the McCarthy era, or when they were like outlawing or quasi-outlawing Marxism. And they were wrong to do that, and I'm glad they don't do that anymore. But fundamentally, like liberal countries, and despite I don't think he either is just creating complete strawman, and this is just like Russian propaganda is supposed to be fed to like Russian university students and stuff who haven't been exposed to the outside world yet, or he just doesn't understand liberalism.
I think it's a more fundamental problem than not understanding liberalism. I take issue with his fundamental thesis that having defeated in his mind, only other two possible modes of political thought, communism and fascism. Apart from those, there is no space like in the space of human ideas other than these three political theories. If you are born in the 20th or 21st centuries, you cannot believe anything else. That point, I think that's bullshit. Like you can believe. The space of ideas is a lot bigger than those things. The space of ideas that are true, or at least bear some sort of correspondence to a reality outside of humans, is narrower. But like you can believe all sorts of stuff.
Potentially infinite space. No, well, potentially or actually is infinite. No, it is an infinite space. Yeah, there's an infinite space of ideas, and a whole bunch of them are expressed on this planet. And during the 20th century, a whole bunch of them were expressed. Like there were, for example, it probably doesn't get much historical attention outside of the things that I'm exposed to, except there's this whole like philosophical movement of decolonization throughout the 20th century amongst African peoples and First Nations people around the world. And that's taken many different forms. Some of them worked out pretty bad in certain parts of Africa. Some of them, like more contemporary ones that are going on now in like Australia and Canada, are more about like reforming the relationship between the Indigenous peoples and the sort of post-colonial nation state. And that entire philosophical movement affects, there's like 400 million First Nations people around the world. Like, yeah, so he's just wrong about that. It's just not the case. But maybe if I just caveat everything that I'm saying with, he's speaking in probably a very superpowers sort of context.
Yeah.
He doesn't care that there's some, like, I don't know, Balinese person who's just trying to, like, recapitulate the, animism that, I don't know, the spirit of the waterfall or something. Like, he's not considering them.
Okay, so I'll steelman Dugin. I'll put on my Dugin shapka now. So in the context of, okay, so say decolonialisation in the Australian context, could you say that that's ultimately taking place within a liberal context? So it's an aspect of liberalism. So you're still operating within that ideological framework of liberalism.
No, some parts of it are like fairly anti-Western, and it depends, obviously who you ask and stuff. But some of it is, as to use the language of Popper, is closed society philosophies. It's just closed society philosophy from like an Aboriginal Australian perspective, or like a Maori perspective. And it's basically like just in my exposure to different cultures, including First Nations cultures, and then obviously like Europeans and stuff, reading off Popper. It's like this line between an open and closed society and the sort of ideas that are floating around to either defend an open society, or you either have like the defense of the open society, or you have some justification for why the society should not be open. And that justification can take essentially any form. In the European context, last century, it was particularly around Marxism and fascism. And this is why I don't think he actually understands what he's talking about, because Japanese imperialism last century is also closed society like philosophy, and it had a big impact on the war. But it wasn't based on Marxism or fascism. Is based on a different justification for having a closed society.
Yeah, I'm glad that you just said more or less what I believe in response to my Dugin steel man.
But having said that, if I just constrain what he's saying to basically Russia versus Europe / NATO, and so like to include the US in there, then maybe I can just be very generous with he's just talking about this like thing that's really affected Europe in the last 100 years.
Yeah. So after the fall of the Soviet Union, you have this situation where liberalism is the only game in town, and he says the individual became the normative subject within the framework of all mankind. And we'll get into his idea of normative subjects or historical subjects.
Maybe we should explain that first.
Pretty shortly, because that's really important.
I think that's super important.
He says that once liberalism won, it rapidly, it's not total, but it's on the way there.
It like monopolized the subject.
Yeah. Instead of becoming a choice or even seen as a choice, it became seen as a universal. And the United States as the center of this empire, with Europe as its periphery, started trying to dominate the entire world and bring the entire world within this ideological framework where universal human rights become a thing, globalism becomes a thing. It becomes the assumed system for everyone, whether they wish to participate or not. And I think this is not wholly true, but this definitely has elements of truth. So one place where I do think Dugin falls down is in that thinking that liberalism hasn't always actually been like this. Liberalism from the start has been quite a crusading ideology. This belief that, so from John Locke, God has maker's right on human beings. God made human beings. Therefore, human beings can't own each other, can't force each other to do certain things, because humans are God's property, and you can't infringe on other people's property rights in that way, even God's. And that implication is because people thought that Christianity was also universal, that this maker's right is universal. It applies to all human beings. So Dugin's making out that liberalism only started to regard itself as universal when it became post-liberalism, once the United States, or NATO more broadly, defeated the Soviet Union. I think it's always had those crusading elements of needing to spread itself to non-believers. It's always been animated by a sort of religious fervour. I think in large part because, at least initially, it was very consciously based on Christianity, and its ethics are still Christian. It's just the sort of Reddit atheists who dominate university discourse at the moment now deny that it has anything to do with Christianity, despite still largely hewing to Christian ethics.
I guess So what I'd like to sort of unpack is his idea of what the subject is in history, and then compare the three subjects from the three previous ideologies. Or did you have an alternative?
Yeah, I mean, we should still probably define what post-modernity is because it underpins everything. Like that, he's saying that liberalism has undergone a fundamental change once it became the only possible ideology and is globalizing and has reached a stage where it's inexorably taking over the world. It's destroying politics and destroying time and hardening into something that can't be fought against within the context of politics as we currently have them. So do you want to talk about the three preceding political theories before the birth of the fourth?
Yeah, and they're the obvious ones, given that it's a Russian geopolitical commentator. It's fascism, and he makes a distinction between well, I'll come back to that in a tick. Fascism, Marxism, and liberalism. And he might say like neoliberalism in particular, potentially. So fascism, well, firstly, liberalism he calls the first one. Then was it fascism was the second one, I think. And
Communism
Marxism is the third. Oh, so communism is the second, and fascism is the third.
Yeah.
They each have like different ideological structures. One of the main components of sort of each of the structures is like what's the focal point, or what's kind of the he calls it the subject, but the kind of the guiding focal point of analysis, both in terms of their descriptions of the world, or especially the political world, but also like ethically, or yeah, politically. And he gives an interesting. He's like, well, the second and third ideologies were opposed to liberalism, so that's good. So let's try and like fish out the good stuff from them, and like discard some of the bad stuff. And I was like, interesting. How's he going to do that? And yes. And did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so his main way of describing the three political theories is by describing the historical subject in each. The historical subject being the human being or the state of being for a person within these ideologies. And from that, the ideology comes. So in the case of liberalism, the historical subject is the individual. And an individual as something that defines itself as apart from race, class, caste, and the internal logic of having the individual as the historical subject means that liberalism seeks to free itself, or the individual seeks to free itself from all external controls. Hence the antinomian trajectory of liberal societies that he observes, where there's a gradual overcoming of, say, things that are seen to be sacred if they entail a restriction on an individual. And then he says that this internal logic leads inevitably to postmodernity, where the individual seeks to overcome themselves or throw off themselves as a limitation, which leads to this undifferentiated mass that he says is the state of the world today. Communism had the class as the historical subject, and a person was only really contextualized within a class, or you could only understand them once you'd situated them within a class, whether that's within the bourgeois class, within the proletariat, and things like that. Fascism's interesting in that the historical subject could be different depending on the particular fascist society. So broadly speaking, he sees fascism as a totalitarianism which turns towards the symbols or ideas of a traditional society. And in the case of Nazi Germany, the historical subject was the race, Aryan race. Within the context of Italian fascism, it was a state based on traditional forms. They liked calling back to Rome quite often.
They call it the spirit of the people.
And so the
state, the spirit of the people.
Yeah, the project, one of the main aspects of the fourth political theory is to come up with a historical subject for the fourth political theory, because once you've come up with that subject, that's going to allow you to think through a lot of the features of the fourth political theory. And
so did you get the sense
he sees it as Dasein, as Heidegger's Dasein is a candidate of a historical subject for the fourth political theory.
If I'm mistaken, but I almost got the sense that he thought this was almost like a incantation. Like, he made this one interesting point. He says, like, the fourth political theory will be an ontological structure based on existential anthropology. And and it sounded as if what he was saying, and I could almost like kind of bend my mind to try to understand, to kind of see what he's getting at. He's like, if you follow something like the explanation of culture in terms of like the meme explanation, that like ideas are abstract constructors that compete for replication within a human population, something like that, then like it is weirdly true that if somebody comes up with an ideology and then puts that out into the world, if that ideology is able to compete against other idea replicators, then like in a weird way, not to sort of say that they're alive in an organic sense, but they sort of have this autonomy of their own. And like, for example, like Marx doesn't like know how his theories impacted, say, like Cambodians or whatever. He couldn't have predicted that, but it is in fact, he is part of the causal chain of like why they were killing fields in Cambodia last century. And so weirdly enough, not exactly that I agree with him that his theory is an ontological structure, but in him like putting these ideas out there, he's potentially trying to invoke something to come into existence, invoke an idea to be the
spawned. Way I saw it was that, he seems to see. Maybe we'll be half Steel and Anning him here. So he seems to see ideologies or worldviews from a very, very subjective perspective. So from the perspective of the subject who comes to believe in, say, liberalism versus Nazism, the way you interpret sensory experience, that explanatory model you're overlaying on the world or just on the sense information you're getting from the world is different, and you're going to process that information differently. And because he's very much a fan of Heidegger, of Husserl, and as such, I guess you could say, okay, since you're changing people's experience of the world, that in some sense entails an ontological transformation. So their being, given that their phenomenology is so different, is therefore changed. I don't subscribe to that myself, but I think that's what he's getting at.
Yeah, that would make sense. So he's obsessed with phenomenology. You know, Heidegger is a phenomenologist, right? And Husserl. So I guess that makes sense.
I also say this as someone who has minimal knowledge of Heidegger and Husserl. So I could be and probably am wrong, but I think a lot of his talking about an ontologically based fourth political theory is from that feeling of the subjectivity really giving rise to someone's being, or it being really inextricably linked to someone's being.
I'd be inclined. I think that's a reasonable interpretation. I'm going to just caveat everything I say with like, I find this stuff not my usual sort of reading, and the background knowledge about the references to phenomenological philosophers and existential philosophers and a whole bunch of French and Russian intellectuals was, how would you say, outside of my normal wheelhouse of ideas to grapple
foreign.
with. Yes, extremely foreign. So I might be misrepresenting what he's saying at any particular point.
Oh, I mean, the same goes for me. It is so because he says that post-modernity, so this overthrowing this individual under liberalism, which was modernity, which seeks to overthrow all external impediments to it expressing its own individuality, inevitably giving rise to post-modernity and post-liberalism, wherein this individual seeks to overthrow itself and becomes a post-individual, or he sometimes calls it a dividual as opposed to an individual. Yeah. And he traces this back to Plato and Heraclitus.
Yeah.
And the centrality of logos to Western philosophy, the centrality of rationality, which, like, as a criticism of this, means that does this mean that his book is not applicable to non-European / European adjacent civilizations? Because he says that in Plato put ideas between humans in existence. Mm. So there's this idea that the logos is this thing separate to humanity, this structure. He sees it as fundamentally masculine, and it gets really Evolian when he's talking about it.
Yeah.
This thing that excludes and orders, or this fundamental ordering impulse, as opposed to chaos, which is feminine and is an all-encompassing impulse. And it was people like Heraclitus, and particularly Plato, identified all external reality with logos. And things in our sense perception are true insofar as they correspond to that external logos. And he says that this is the fundamental seed of what's caused the degeneration of our ontology in modern society. He traces it all the way back to Plato. He says that without chaos, which is constantly renewing itself, logos begins to degenerate. He just says this, like, you just have to take his word for it, I guess. And having said that, given that we've rejected this self-renewing chaos, we start to get alienated from everything, and we develop calculating thinking, which is this purely rational type of thinking, and lose sight of pure being because we're no longer living truly in the moment. We're living with this technological or rational apparatus sitting between ourselves and our being. So we're interpreting our being through the lens of this rationality. And this is made concrete in our pursuit of technology. So technology is an addition, it's this externalization of this rational form of thinking that itself comes to shape even further how we think and how we experience the world, further separating us from being. And he calls this nihilism. We're just getting more and more and more nihilistic and alienated to the point where we become post-individuals and seek to overthrow that very individuality that inevitably, I think he's seeming to say, stemmed from Plato, and that leads to post-modernity. It gets pretty weird, and this is a classic example of the why philosophy, where you just say, well, why? And it stops working.
So do you think that it's... I not exactly agreed with him, but I saw what he was saying in terms of Western civilization's centering of the individual. I guess what I was trying to do is think through, like, is it, how would I put it? Is it that we think of, like, like in Italian fascism, there was this thing, the state, and in Hegelian philosophy, there was this thing of the Geist, the animating spirit, and with German fascism, it was the race. Whereas, like, maybe it's because I haven't read broadly enough. Maybe you'd be able to speak to it better than me, since you might be a bit better read with the sort of more classical liberal philosophers. But I always thought about, like, not so much with liberalism being about the individual in, like, a direct correspondence with this other sort of, like, meta structure, like the class or the race. But I always thought of it as more like each individual. And so, like, there's specific concrete individuals in each circumstance. And the reason why we don't use collectivizing, like, language or ideas is because those things blur you seeing each particular concrete specific individual. And so it's like, when you talk about, like, individual rights for whatever, I'm not sort of predicating, well, at least I didn't think so, maybe I am in the background, like, predicating on, like, some sort of something analogous to, like, the class, like an entity, an ideological entity called the individual. Although maybe for shorthand people use that, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think at least in Dugin land, he'd probably say that that's because you're a liberal, that you instinctively view society or view the world as a composition of individuals rather than a composition of classes
or castes or whatever.
Or say in Nazi Germany, a composition of races.
I guess because the reason why I think this is an important point is because these philosophies, they are invoking these entities, like the race or the class or Dasein, as, like, entities that have causal power through well, like, what's the phrase, on the stage of history, or the logic of history, like, they're contributing to, like, the historical political processes, and it's like this entity as such is having this, whereas I guess what I'm saying is, like, there is none of that. Those things don't exist. There's individuals and they have ideas and they can form collectives, but there isn't, like, the individual. But again, yeah, maybe I'm just a fucking liberal normtard. Doesn't understand anything about anything.
Yeah, I guess to steelman him, you could say that the individual, that while there is, say, physical instantiations of different human beings, like there are two humans who occupy different positions in space, their fundamental worldview through which they generate ideas and through which they act are informed by different things. And so the liberal individual is animated by this principle of freedom from.
Yes.
So freedom from the, say, like if you're talking about Hayek, like the arbitrary imposition of someone else's will, the arbitrary coercion of another person. You have freedom from that. Whereas an individual under Marxism, their way of viewing the world and of coming up with ideas is based upon their knowledge or their understanding of themselves as part of a class or an expression of a class, as opposed to a purely autonomous actor who acts to be free from influence. Like, I guess that's a way you could maybe think of this.
So,
like, the problem, like, all conceptual systems ultimately are going to have some distortion. They're going to have, even in the best case scenario, like, there's going to be a gap between them and whatever is actually external to us.
Yeah, for sure. So having sort of unpacked that a fair bit, should we talk about the subject of the fourth political theory? Because that's probably much more like new ideas that he's proposing, as opposed to, or not necessarily new ideas, but like substantive part, rather than him just criticizing these previous ideologies. when he starts like proposing a new idea. His first hint of it is he has this idea of like the imagination. So I might just read a quote because I found this part really, really interesting. Well, actually, you know what? Actually, instead of going that, should we talk about the 4 hypotheses?
Which of those?
He had these 4 hypotheses about the fourth political. Do you remember this? Like the compound subject. So the subject is not going to be like the individual or a class or whatever. It's going to be like some compound thing. The phenomenological standpoint. So it's like, so we're going to work from phenomenology as our like base lens on this problem. 3, Dasein hypothesis, and 4, l'imaginationnaire.
Oh, he comes up. So through this book, he talks about how in some points he seems to hint that he's undecided as to the historical subject of the fourth political theory. But then in most of the book, he acts as if he's already decided that it's Dasein.
Or maybe that it's like...
So I think I remember the
Dasein
section you're talking about where he says, okay, well, the historical subject could be a blend of different historical subjects as found in other political theories, or it could be Dasein, or it could be something of the imagination which exists anteriorly to rationality and things like that. But having said all this, he, from then on, without having said explicitly, just kind of acts as if Dasein is to be the historical subject.
Yeah, or unless like whatever particular characteristics Dasein takes on, he's trying to account for variations without like... Oh, he is pretty committal at certain points. Like he seems to know what Dasein wants, even though
yeah.
I'm pretty sure he's just saying that there's the Dasein.
Yeah, and as like this definition of Dasein is going to be pretty poor because I don't know a great deal about Heidegger. But basically, Dasein is Heidegger.
You haven't done a PhD.
Heidegger
in Heidegger
split. Yeah. Heidegger split the definition of existence into a bunch of different words because he felt that the single word existence really didn't capture what was important, or less existence, more being in English. So he distinguished between, for example, pure being and a being in the world. He saw those as 2 different things that should be described using different terms. And Dasein means... in German, I think it literally means being there. And so it's a being in the world which is uncovering itself. And he used Dasein to replace these ideas like consciousness and mind. Instead of having these things, he has Dasein, which is this being aware of its own being in the world, which is constantly uncovering this project that it has and constantly striving towards that. It's a type of being which is quite directional. It's constantly directing towards itself towards some sort of project. And in death, I think there is the possibility for the realization or the capture of that project.
And is it correct to say that is like an actual thing, is what they're proposing? Is it's like a separate... I don't understand this concept.
No, I don't really either.
Does Dasein is like a ghost, or is it more like is something else?
I saw it as basically an existence or an extant being's self-awareness of itself as an extant being which has just been thrown into existence.
And that could include humans or dogs or some other entity.
I'd expect so. I mean, I don't know Heidegger's view of canine Dasein, but I assume that they would also have a sense of Dasein as far as they're self-aware.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But situating Dasein as the historical subject, he says that
doesn't really help that much.
It exists anteriorly to all sorts of divisions that that a mind that's been conditioned to view the world in terms of those divisions would hold to be self-evident. So, for example, he talks about gender in the fourth political theory, and he says that he has this long thing where he starts really sounding like a social justice warrior, talking about how he goes after liberalism for being fundamentally patriarchal, and the idea of a normative gender in liberalism entails a white, rational, adult bourgeois male, and he calls that gender. And he says that all apparent advances in gender equality in liberal society really consist of making women into this normative liberal gender, the male gender. So they're not true advancements. And he then says, if the historical subject is Dasein, well, Dasein exists before male and female have been established as a duality. It's this experience of self-aware existence or being before that. It's at a deeper level of existence. Therefore, the gender of the fourth political theory is the radical subject. It's this undivided subject, anterior to gender. He starts going all sorts of wacky places with Dasein as the historical subject. He does do this interesting thing, actually, which I quite liked. He calls it breaking the hermeneutic circle. And he uses this as one of the methodologies with which to find positive aspects of the fourth political theory. So breaking the hermeneutic circle. So basically, hermeneutics is basically the study of representation, or a way of analysing representation. And his concept of breaking the hermeneutic circle is to take an ideology, for example, fascism or communism, and to break its fundamental system of representing the world, to, in his words, decontaminate it. So he takes fascism or Nazism, for example, and says, okay, so what's its foundational explanatory principle, almost? And it's, okay, so you've got a master race whose goal is to dominate lesser races. And he says, okay, you take that out. You take out that fundamental aspect of its hermeneutical model, of its way of representing. And in doing so, you've broken fascism's hermeneutic circle. So instead of being this unified mode of thought, now it's just a collection of disparate thoughts that are no longer unified by this hermeneutical principle. And from that, you can take useful components that you think will allow the fourth political theory to overcome liberalism and institute a better world, I guess.
Yeah, and he even does
so
this
I
to
found
liberalism.
I found that pretty interesting.
That was... this was in the part of the book that I found interesting, and I was hopeful that it would... I was hopeful that after sort of this chapter, I think it's only like chapter 2 or something, that the rest of the book would be like more direct, cogent attacks on liberal philosophy.
Yeah, I was in the same boat. I was feeling optimistic at this point.
And then he just didn't do that. He just went off the fucking deep end.
He went off the fucking deep end.
Talking about like Dasein and history and historical development and like misunderstanding evolution and thermodynamics and stuff. And I was like, wait, no, go back to the thing that you were doing before. Like, that was interesting.
Yes,
like, I might not have agreed with you, but at least it was interesting. This is just fucking batshit.
Yeah, and it is interesting. So this does lead into another purple-haired Alexander Dugin as SJW section, because he does the university campus wokeism to Alexander Dugin Russian supremacism pipeline is very real. And part of that is through... So in decontaminating fascism or Nazism, in breaking its hermeneutic circle, he comes to a discussion of racism. And he says that in the fourth political theory, it is necessary to reject all forms of racism. And when he was talking about this, I thought, okay, this sounds like this sounds like something I could get on board with. But then I realised what his definition of racism was, and it is so hilariously broad that it really becomes meaningless. Where he starts out by saying, okay, so Hitler's racism was actually the thing which ultimately led to the failure of fascism. And as an aside, part of the reason why he's saying we need to break the hermeneutical circles of fascism and communism is because both of those ultimately proved themselves unable to overcome liberalism, which I thought was an interesting idea. That, okay, you can't run these two ideologies because liberalism has proven itself basically more evolutionarily fit than these two. Mm-hmm. It outcompeted them. Mm. Mm. But in constructing something new, you take things from them. And so he said Hitler's racism led Hitler to do things like oppress Slavs, which I'm sure Alexander Dugin, as a Slavic man, has no motivated reasoning in believing. He says it made Hitler underestimate the strength of Russia and invade, which ultimately led to the downfall of the Nazi war machine. So he views the racism of Nazism as really the element of it which destroyed it. From that, he says there can be no racism in the false political theory, but he goes into cuckoo town. So I quote, Hitler's racism, however, is only one form of racism. This type of racism is the most obvious, straightforward, biological, and therefore the most repulsive. There are other forms of racism. Cultural racism, asserting that there are high and low cultures. Civilizational, dividing people into those civilized and those insufficiently civilized. Technological, viewing technological development as the main criterion of societal value. Social, stating in the spirit of the Protestant doctrine of predestination that the rich are the best and the greatest as compared to the poor. Economic racism, based on which all humanity is ranked according to regions of material well-being. And evolutionary racism, for which it is axiomatic that human society is the result of biological development, in which the basic processes of evolution of the species, survival of the fittest, natural selection, etc., continue today. The European and American society is fundamentally afflicted with this type of racism, unable to eradicate it from itself despite all the effort. Fully aware of how revolting this phenomenon is, people in the West tend to make racism a taboo. However, all this turns into a witch hunt. New pariahs accused of fascism are its victims, often for no apparent reason. Thus, this very political correctness and its norms are transformed into a totalitarian discipline of political, purely racist exclusions. I also would like another quote about how everything is racist. So, the newest types of racism are glamour, fashion, and following the latest informational trends. Yeah. The norms are set by models, designers, party socialites, and the owners of the latest version of mobile phones or laptop computers. Conformity or non-conformity with the glamour code is located at the very base of the mass strategies for social segregation and cultural apartheid. Today, this is not associated directly with the economic factor, but is gradually gaining independent sociological features. This is the ghost of the glamour dictatorship, the new generation of racism. So, in describing these things, he describes a bunch of forms of discrimination, which, so for example, ranking different societies as civilized or uncivilized, viewing technological development as the only criterion of social value, ranking the actual almost moral worth or the fundamental worthwhileness of different cultures or societies on the basis of how much money they have. I don't like those things, but I don't think those are forms of racism.
No,
I think those are different forms of discrimination.
I went, after reading that for a bit, I was like, oh, what he's doing is he's saying it's discrimination. Basically, he's just hijacked the word racism because
this is where I think he's being pretty
like to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think he's just arguing in bad faith here because he knows that Westerners don't like being called racist.
Yeah.
And probably, like, I'm assuming this is written for, well, it was written in Russian, a Russian audience. So
yes.
Part of it, I think, might be that, we're going to own the Westerners and show that actually they're really racist. by basically defining racism so widely that everything the West does is racist.
Yeah.
This part was funny because if this were published in, I don't know, like whatever rag the socialist alternative in Australia is putting out, then no one would blink.
Yeah,
I also don't take it very seriously.
Book, Cynical Theories. Was it Cynical Theories or another book that's like there were those scientists who sent in like a postmodern analysis of quantum theory or something, or gender theoretic analysis of I don't know, like Einstein's relativity or something like that. They sent it into whatever was it something hoax, and they sent it into like some shitty fucking humanities journal, and they actually published it, and it was fucking these scientists. This was just taking the piss. Two physicists published a paper called something like the conceptual penis. Yes, that's right.
It was word salad. I read through it, and it was basically, it seemed to be arguing against the physical existence of the penis and saying that it was a purely conceptual societal construct. And it was just written as a joke, and it was published. We should actually read that for this podcast, because that was a god tier troll.
That's actually a good one for a short.
An unbelievable troll.
So good. We should put that on the schedule as like a short episode that wouldn't take much.
A short one, yeah. We should read that. Also because
we might be able to read it live if it's short enough.
Yeah, let's have a look.
It's like 10 pages or something.
It'll be hard to read because they mimic the turgid prose of a lot of social science papers perfectly.
But I guess
so
we can read it without
impenetrable
without trying to actually understand it. You know, like
yes,
because it's not meant to be understood.
No. The point of the article is that it cannot be understood. It was a brilliant troll.
Fantastic troll. Anyways,
I'm trying to remember.
Sorry,
I think we read it when it came out. I think Ed sent it to me.
Yeah.
Around the time it came out, and we laughed at it. We're like, what the fuck is this? Like, university departments are just going backwards. And then, it turned out to have been a troll.
So good. I love that they actually got published. And it was like a major, at least for whatever the discipline was, it was like an important journal.
Yeah, it speaks very highly of the peer review process, that people looked at that pile of shit and went, yeah, I want to put my name against this. I'm countersigning on this. This is the good shit.
And they thought
society will be better for this having been
really
put out.
Because these are physicists, and even physicists are saying this. It's fucking or maybe or did they do it pseudonymously? Maybe they did it pseudonymously.
I think they did it pseudonymously. Yeah. When you consider the pabulum that's normally published in those sort of journals, though, it doesn't surprise me. I'm trying to remember whether it was Judith Butler or someone else who was writing that E equals MC squared is a sexed and therefore fundamentally sexist equation, because the speed of light is analogous to masculinity and nothing can move faster than it. Therefore it is hierarchical, therefore it is sexist. And I thought, like, what's to stop me saying that C in that equation represents femininity, and so it is fundamentally sexist, but in a good way? Or, even more fundamentally, what is to stop me from saying, no, fuck off, that represents the speed of light? That's not representing a gender. Anyway, this is off topic.
Ed strongly recommended that we read some Judith Butler for the show.
Oh, man. I mean, yeah,
he
we
might
should.
Even join us if we do a Judith Butler. He said he might join us. We can just rip into it. He fucking hates Judith Butler.
Yeah, well, it's Judith Butler is the combination of she does put her finger on real problems, and then it's just buried in a pile of shit.
So did you think how do I put this? How generous should I be in my reading of Dugin? Because at some points it just, like, with the racism thing, it seemed really cynical.
That struck me as deeply cynical. So I would say most of the book didn't strike me as cynical. It just struck me as word salad.
But every now and then it seemed really
then
cynical.
A part of the book struck me as a fairly concrete, political description of someone who does not like the fact that the US is very, very powerful and able to push around other countries. And then part of it seemed like a very cynical invective against the West, where he just takes things that Westerners say they don't like racism, sexism, things like that, redefines those terms in precisely the way that allows him to describe it, basically everything he doesn't like in the West as racist or sexist, and then say, haha, look at that, I've owned these libs.
Yeah, we first saw this with Mussolini, right? Just hype.
Yeah.
Right,
Yes.
so it's propaganda. I watched some stuff on China and occasionally see some of their propaganda, and not China, but like it's in the CCP, and seems to be quite a common tactic. It's like what would you call it? It's like an abuse of like the language.
I call it fucking bullshit.
Yeah.
But it's just like, it's not an argumentative tactic just to redefine a word.
Yeah.
And to use the residual capacity of its previous or more commonly accepted definition as an intensifier for your argument. So an example of this is Slavoj Žižek, who's a notoriously terrible thinker, where he said he likes to make seemingly wild claims. Like he says, Gandhi was more violent than Hitler. And you think, okay, how do you justify this? The justification is that he's redefined violence to mean affecting political change. So what he does is he makes the statement feel wild by riding the wave of that word violence's actual commonly accepted meaning. But the intellectual content of his argument is based upon his new definition of, violence means affecting political change. It's this typical bait and switch, which is just so unsatisfying. When people do that, it pisses me off so much. And this is what Dugin is doing.
Dugin
right
had
here.
a fantastic one, which have I got the sorry, I've got to reference. Oh yeah, okay. Let me jump to the reference. I've got a really good one for this specifically. You can talk or whatever. Oh no, I can go to location. Oh, I can jump straight to a particular location with my magic Kindle. Yes, there is. Yeah. Is there anything that we could take away from liberalism? So he's breaking the hermeneutic circle of liberalism. And he has just broken it, and now he's like, he's fishing out whatever fucking fish heads can be cooked out of the fucking soup of garbage in the sea. Oh, that is liberalism. Sorry. Got very loose with that analogy. Liberalism is garbage in the sea. And this is him taking pity on us and trying to rescue some of it. It says, is there anything that we could take from liberalism? From liberalism that was hypothetically defeated and has lost its axis? So like in the future, when the fourth political theory overturns liberalism, like what could that fourth political theory contain from liberalism? He says, yes, there is. It is the idea, then this is exactly what we were talking about. The idea of freedom, and not just the idea of freedom from, that same substantive freedom rejected by Mill in his liberal program concentrating on freedom from. We must say yes to freedom in all its meanings and in all its perspectives. The fourth political theory should be a theory of absolute freedom, but not as in Marxism, in which it coincides with absolute necessity. No, freedom can be of any kind, free of any correlation or lack thereof, facing any direction and any goal. Freedom is the greatest value of the fourth political theory, which coincides with its center, with its dynamic, energetic core. But this freedom is conceived as human freedom, not freedom of the individual, as the freedom of ethnocentrism and the freedom of Dasein, the freedom of culture and the freedom of society, the freedom for any form of subjectivity except for that of the individual.
Yeah.
When I read that, I think I actually started laughing when I read that. I was like, you got to be kidding, mate. And then he says, he quotes Jean-Paul Sartre when he says, man as an individual is a prison without walls. Where do these fucking people get off where they think that just saying something that seems contradictory is somehow profound?
Yeah, this irritates me a lot. People who seem to confuse profundity and obscurity. If you say something that is
That
like,
could characterize
they'll just
so
say
much
things
fucking
that don't make
philosophy,
any
though.
fucking sense. That's like 95% of philosophy. It's just like people lighting matches in your face.
Clicking in your face. hey. Yeah, because it's just like, the first thing is like, fuck Jean-Paul Sartre. A man as an individual is a prison without walls. I mean, I bet you that's taken out of context anyway, so I'm not going to say fuck Jean-Paul Sartre. I don't know, maybe he's a good dude, but the way that Dugin's using it here is just like, seems to really fucking ridiculous. But just his tactic of like saying, all right, well, we've got freedom, but you can't have individual freedom. We'll give freedom to these other things, the Dasein. It will have infinite freedom, freedom of society, infinite freedom of form of subjectivity, except for the individual. So Dasein can do anything it wants, but it can't adopt the perspective of an individual or the individual.
Okay, I'm going to put on my Steelman shapka for Dugin now. So what he's talking about here. So this will dovetail nicely into talking about multipolarity and relativism, which are other really big features of Dugin's thought and therefore of the fourth political theory. He says that you can't judge a culture as better than another culture because all those judgments about whether something is better or not exist within the context of one culture. And so you can't judge the worth of one culture only from the standpoint of another culture. And then he says people in one culture cannot understand those of another culture. It's just not possible. Which does beg the question of, as someone who says that he's Russian and then says that Russians are fundamentally opposed to the West or have always fought against the West, as a Russian man of Russian culture talking about the West, then why should we take his opinions about how the West works seriously at all, given that he's just acknowledged that he can't understand it? He seems to credit himself with this apparently impossible knowledge of other cultures and then writes extensively on why this shouldn't exist. But that's
maybe
probably
because,
irrelevant.
Maybe it's
that's
because
probably not
he's
important.
been exposed to enough of it as so this may just like trying to stillman it as well. Like maybe he'd say something like the degeneration of Russian nationalism and Russian culture as we've been infiltrated by these Western ideas, like gives him maybe some. But I still think that would contradict like what he's saying. But I'm just trying to be generous.
Yeah, I don't know how you get around that.
Before we dovetail,
anyway, so he talks about this multipolarity. I've got this this quote here. Undoubtedly racist is the idea of unipolar globalization. It is based on the fact that Western, especially American, society equates its history and its values to universal law and artificially tries to construct a global society based on these local and historically specific values. Democracy, the market, parliamentarianism, capitalism, individualism, human rights, and unlimited technological development. These ideas are local, and globalization is trying to impose them onto all of humanity as something that is universal and taken for granted. This attempt implicitly argues that the values of all other peoples and cultures are imperfect, underdeveloped, and are subject to modernization and standardization based on the Western world. Globalization is thus nothing more than a globally deployed model of Western European, or rather, Anglo-Saxon ethnocentrism, which is the purest manifestation of racist ideology. So this is a bridge between everything I don't like is racist, Tumblrine of Dugin, and this idea of multipolarity. And this will tie into what you were saying about absolute freedom. So he talks about the ethnos as the greatest value of fourth political theory, as a cultural phenomenon. He says, ethnos is the greatest value of the fourth political theory as a cultural phenomenon, as a community of language, religious belief, daily life, and of sharing resources and efforts, as an organic entity written into an accommodating landscape, as a refined system of constructing models for marital unions, as an always unique means of establishing a relationship with the outside world, as the matrix of the life world, and as the source of all the language games. So, when he talks about absolute freedom, what I think he's talking about is the absolute freedom of these different ethnoses to exist, and the absolute freedom of them to express themselves as organic entities. I think that's what he means as absolute freedom, as opposed to a westernized world where you've got this, he calls it a limited freedom, where it's this single belief, it's an ideological or ethnos monoculture, which is imposing itself on the entirety of the world, wherein individuals may have freedom, but there's actually limited true freedom because there can't be other ethnoses besides that of the Anglo-Saxon ethnos. I think that was a very long way of describing how I think he's viewing absolute freedom.
Sure, why not? let's go with that. Yeah, because
parts of that I don't disagree with. So I think it is quite an arrogant idea for Westerners to say, "Look, we've got it all right. We're going to try to impose this on the rest of the world." And there definitely is an element of that.
Yeah, interventionist.
And look, it's definitely not breeding much goodwill.
Western,
and a lot of the time, it just totally misses the point that maybe people like the culture they grew up in and don't necessarily want to be westernized.
Yeah.
So
it would seem
I'll give him some credit. Like that is a real thing.
Western interventionist geopolitics would seem to be in contravention of related ideas in, I don't know, from what I can judge, like Western ethics. Although I think it's actually in other cultures as well, of like not doing to others what you don't want them to do to you. Seems to be like sort of like structurally important to even the ideas of things like property rights and stuff. So whenever I think it's fairly, if there's a Western country intervening in another country or culture against like their will, it's usually pretty like it's a pretty easy thing to say, like, hey, that's like obviously a contradiction with regards to like these other aspects of Western culture. That being said, it's not always that clear cut. You know, there might be factions within a country that like want help from outside or whatever. You know, but I guess like broadly speaking,
I think it actually. I mean, definitely for scoring political points, you can say it's in contravention of Western culture, but I do think it represents more a tension within Western culture, in that you have this idea that the individual should be able to choose, but at the same time, liberalism does universalize, or it seeks a universality, in that there are things like human rights that apply to everybody independently of their beliefs. And if they don't believe in them, that's because they're wrong, not because human rights don't apply to them. And so within the context of liberalism, you can, and people do, justify foreign interventions or interventions into other cultures practicing their culture on the basis of, well, what they're doing is just wrong.
Yeah, or it's good for them or something, like either sort of more paternalistic or, yeah.
It doesn't represent a contradiction, but a real tension.
Yeah.
That there are these two aspects of liberalism that don't sit necessarily comfortably with each other, but are both there.
That was definitely the case. That was more like it's like under colonization, like, you know, obviously it was a big, like, very complex, but like there were aspects of colonization that were like about almost like evangelism, missionary stuff, you know, like spreading
not even almost, like just literally like, and putting people of colonized countries into basically evangelism schools.
Yeah. And cultural eradication and stuff. So, but then like there's this like new post-World War II era of like some sort of attempted secularization of things like human rights, UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And then there's still this like almost evangelical. And like I can, if you were a person in, say, like I don't know, the like international development field, and you're thinking like, yeah, we should go in and help these people in these other countries. I don't know, like maybe like I kind of understand where they're coming from, but I it's just like seems as though like if you're doing that against the other person's will, like there's a real tension there.
Yeah. I don't pretend that my beliefs of when it comes to foreign intervention are settled.
No, mine aren't.
I can see plenty of different arguments that, at least at the moment, I regard as fairly compelling for different reasons.
There's probably not a universally correct answer.
Well, no, I guess the most sensible approach would be to say, well, different situations are different, and
you just need a reason.
You should judge it based on the individual situation.
Yeah.
He talks about monotonicity and evolution together in one section, and this is interesting.
What is a monotonic process, Jack?
A monotonic process is a process where there's basically, the way he describes it is where there is a single value or a single thing that is increasing continuously. And he contrasts this with something that is cyclical, where you also have a decline of whatever particular thing you're examining. And he uses this as a way to criticize progress, where the idea of progress, he says, is present in all of the modern political theories. So liberalism, communism, fascism, all of them regard progress as this thing that they really are the vanguards of, or the inheritors of. So in the case of liberalism, progress is the spreading of liberal values, of increasing freedom for individuals, freeing individuals from things like, from particular roles in society, this extension of freedom from. So freeing women from patriarchal structures in society, freeing people from racist structures, freeing people from caste systems. In the case of communism, this progress is a series of historical stages, so moving from feudalism to capitalism to socialism to finally communism. Then in the case of fascism, he says it has an evolutionary ideal. So he says, okay, well, Nietzsche's idea that the Übermensch will come about and look down on those around him, he says represents a monotonic process. I don't really know if this is a monotonic process in that Nietzsche just rejected the idea of progress towards something completely and said that you should revalue, or the Übermensch will reevaluate his own values and live according to those. I felt like about fascism it was a real stretch. Also because fascism had a real declinist narrative. So, for example, with Hitler, when he was coming to power, he was describing, what part of his pitch was basically, well, Germany is in decline and without me it will continue to decline. So that's not actually a description of a monotonic process. With Marxism as well, actually, I don't think Dugin describing it as something that describes a monotonic process is right either, because it has an endpoint. Once you get to communism, or the stage of history of communism, then you don't get further progress beyond that. It stops. So it's not actually a monotonic increase with the specific definition of monotonicity given by Dugin as something that continues to progress forever. It's only really liberal progressivism that fits his definition. I thought this was an example of kind of shaky thinking.
Only the strand of liberal progressivism that I do not hold, but it would be something along the ideas of like a sort of implicit inability to make mistakes. Because like with liberalism, like it has the openness for there to be backwards motion. Backwards by whatever you like. But you can error correct. So even liberalism, like at least on a case by case basis, it might not be monotonic. Anyways, yeah, I know. I found that one really weird.
So I'll try to be nice to him and assume he's talking about the history is on our side.
Yeah,
progressives.
Yeah.
The people who regard
yes,
this expansion of the moral sphere to encompass. First it encompasses straight white men, and then you expand it, and it encompasses women, then you expand it, and it encompasses gay people, then you expand it.
Moral spheres, yeah.
And they view it as this inevitability. So I assume he's talking about those people.
If he's talking
I
about
guess in the field of economics.
Yeah, sorry.
The field of economics, like this view that there does seem to be an implicit assumption with a lot of economics that growth will just go on forever.
Yeah.
Maybe he's talking about that as well.
I would say there's an interesting, I guess maybe I'm just nitpicking here, but if that's what he's attacking, the inevitability of either economic or whatever sorts of progress, like there would be two slightly different but important, like slight variations. The variation is important. One is saying that we could, in principle, have like economic growth going on indefinitely, but it doesn't mean that it will happen. Versus like, oh, well, it will happen, or like we must make it happen. Like some people don't believe in economic growth, and I don't know, they want to become monks or whatever. But if there are people saying like the other side of history, or like we're just going to keep on ratcheting up economic growth, or it will definitely happen, then I suppose maybe we'll take it as those are the people that he's characterizing are like the predominant voices on the in Western liberalism.
Yeah, a big issue with his argument here is that he seems to be saying that this monotonicity is a fundamental feature of liberalism, and because liberalism is now turning into post-liberalism, which is something that precludes any form of thought outside of it, therefore monotonicity is inevitable.
I can give him that.
A criticism is that you can criticize monotonicity from within the context of liberalism. Yeah. You don't actually need to step outside of liberalism to disagree with this.
Yeah, and interesting. Like, okay, I can try to put his point another way if I sort of, because it's pretty wanky that he used monotonicity as a word, but
it is also he is bending the definition of monotonicity.
He's trying to, and these sorts of people do this. I think he's trying to hijack the he specifically hijacks it from like mathematics and thermodynamics, and he's trying to like hedge his historio-political analysis and prophecies in like pseudo-scientific language, or scientific sounding sort of stuff. But you might be able to say that like liberalism or like Western liberalism, if it has like this open nature that open and dynamic nature that Deutsch and Popper talk about, then that is not necessarily monotonic, but it is like pushing, like it's pushing change, and perhaps even accelerating change.
Yeah.
And you could say, well, like the main difference being that like Marxism's like assumed to know where that change was taking us to like an ultimate end of history, and it's a defined state, whereas like the ultimate end of history in a globalized, hyper-technological, managerial, liberal world is not like an end state, a clear end state like Marxism. It's more like the static on a TV. It's just this like kind of random homogeneity with like an underlying liberal hyper-accelerationism, something like that. if I'm trying to put up the best I can here, man.
Yeah, steel manning Dugin most of the time is pretty difficult, and it'll get even harder because now he talks about evolution.
Oh yeah, let's keep on going with evolution as well. Yeah,
he regards evolution as really the example par excellence of modernity and to an extent, or at least in a simulated sense, postmodernity's obsession with monotonicity, which I'll preface all of this by saying that evolution isn't a monotonic process in the sense that Dugin uses the term. So he uses monotonicity to mean something that always increases, which is a bit of a stretch of the term, but anyway, like we'll just use that definition for now. Evolution doesn't do that. Evolution doesn't have a telos, I think, is probably the fundamental mistake that Dugin is making. So it doesn't have an end point. It doesn't have this thing that it is striving towards. All it really is the description that sounds basically tautological, that things which are most capable of persisting will persist preferentially to those which are less capable of persisting. It doesn't say anything about an end point or something that is being inexorably worked towards.
And I don't know, like we've gone on our little evolution rants before, and you know it's all good, but it just seems to be something that comes up so often, in the things that we read, like that. I suppose it's worth touching on every now and then. I was thinking about it today. I was thinking, like, is it worth like really unpacking it like a heap? And I don't want to like spend too much time unpacking it, but one of the main criticisms I had of both this particular perspective on evolution or invocation of evolution, and even other people like the sociologist that he references, Herbert Spencer. I don't know if he's faithfully representing Spencer's point of view, but if this is Spencer's point of view about like social Darwinism, then like they don't understand that modern Darwinism, the unit of analysis is the gene, and what's being varied and selected is the gene, and the primary like thing in any particular gene's environment, what it's competing against are the other genes. And specifically what a gene is an abstract replicator. So the gene is a piece of information that's instantiated in some chemicals, but point in case, there's molecules that when there's a damage in the DNA of a cell can go and look at that like divergence from the code that's supposed to contain and do error correction. And second point in case, like RNA is a different molecule, but it also encodes information. So like it might be a very slight difference, like, but it's still a physically different substance. So we have two different substances encoding information, plus the proteins encode information. So what's going on here is there's an abstract entity there that's causing physical things to do, to basically like channel energy and move physical matter around against the sort of blind movement that you would expect if you were just seeing like a spontaneous thermodynamic or nuclear or chemical process. And so when you say like a gene is increasing in the portion of the population, we're talking about like a very abstract thing, abstract replicators increasing in the proportion of a gene pool. This is not like talking about the survival of the fittest at the level of like these other structures.
I'll try to be fair to Dugin. So he says that a fundamental feature of modernity is a belief in monotonicity, which leads to this fundamental belief in evolution. Then he brings up Herbert Spencer, who, during his life in the 19th century was prominent, but is not hasn't been all that prominent for a while. Spencer's view was that human society is basically the next stage of animal evolution, and the struggle for survival in human society is economic. And people who have more money are just they have more money because they just have more advantageous adaptations to how human society works than poorer people. And so Dugin looks at this and goes, okay, so this represents basically that liberals believe that the strong should dominate the weak.
Yeah.
and that this is normatively good. He then brings in Ayn Rand as a representative of mainstream liberal opinion and says, yeah, look at this. This woman wrote all sorts of books about how...
Like
I don't actually think Ayn Rand was saying the strong should dominate the weak. At least in my... I've read The Fountainhead.
She's got the virtue of selfishness.
And reading Atlas Shrugged. And to my mind, she's more saying that people who are capable should just be left alone to produce things that they want. It's less about domination.
Yeah. It's more about like some people are better than others and you should let them be better instead of bringing them down.
Yeah. That is more representative of Ayn Rand's opinions.
It's not necessarily that they're better and therefore they should run the world. You should just leave them alone to go and build trains. You should just let them
do what they want. And then he says, okay, so we know that liberals believe in the domination of the poor by the rich. And he says, all right, so globalization is the struggle of the rich against the poor, wherein Westerners dominate everyone else and justify it to themselves using evolution, which itself is justified because of the almost religious belief in monotonicity. Yeah, I just think he's stretching really hard here, and I don't think this works very well. Like, it's based on a redefinition of monotonicity attributed to liberalism in a way that is incomplete at very best, which is then used to justify a very incomplete view of evolution. There are multiple steps here, none of which work.
And then he sort of equates those to modernization, growth, globalization, those sorts of things. Yeah, what do I call it? I call it like associative thinking. I don't know if that's an actual term. But there's times when like having sort of loose associative thinking can be useful, but interesting. But for it to be really useful, you then need to like come back to like criticize the associativity of it, the loose associations. And I often see like Peterson does this all the time. Jordan Peterson like is terrible at it. That's like, just because you can come up with a conjecture doesn't mean that conjecture holds any weight. I can come up with all sorts of things to say.
It's just when you put it that bluntly. Just because you had a thought doesn't mean it's a good thought.
Yeah, and Peterson in particular, like, does, and I have mixed feelings on Peterson, but like he had a pretty big impact on my life when I was having mental health issues. Just having like somebody say like, basically fucking make your bed and shit. It's like, great, good advice. And I like some of his interviews with like anthropologists and primatologists and stuff. And then some of his other stuff, he's just like super associational and just doesn't give a fuck about like having any discipline in his thinking. And just like when he says an idea, he just thinks it's profound, and then that's somehow like an argument for it. There's this one video in particular where it's like this meme that's just burnt into my memory now. It's like where he's talking about, well, the reason why we forage for information is because blah, blah, blah. He's talking about like the foraging reflex and like information gathering. And it's like, first you get the information and then you're information.
Oh,
you become the information and you're literally in.
Jesus.
And I, whenever I think about that, I just think, man, God damn it.
That makes me sick.
What the fuck are you doing? Like, as if that is your... I mean, the guy's put out so much content, so there's going to be stuff of his that's like garbage, just like ours. But like, every now and then when I think about it, I just think like, mate, just sometimes your thoughts aren't good just because, even if they sound catchy. And I think this is the same thing with like, we got it with we're certainly getting it with Dugin. We got it with who's the other? Oh, Evola, maybe a little bit. Where it's just like they can find associations.
Evola's got a lot of it, but he is a lot more disciplined
than
Dugin or Jordan Peterson.
Associations, but it's like, okay, if I propose that there's an association between these two things, a lot of the time these sorts of thinkers will take that association as a given and not explain it. Why should we take
a real exemplar of this school of thought is Oswald Spengler. I'm reading The Decline of the West at the moment.
How's that going?
And It's a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying it.
Are you doing that with Ed?
He's basically taken drawing parallels between things in history to the point of being an art form. I've never seen someone do it to the extent that he does.
It's supposed to be really fun, right? But with regards to Spangler and those other people, like they seem to be taking like is Dugin doing it as well? Or maybe Marx did it as well. As like, if we find this association, this like pendulum of history or something, then we can map current events to that and make a prediction. I assume that's what Spengler's doing. I haven't read Spengler.
Yeah. Yeah, Spengler has definitely a variation on that theme. His morphological theory of history.
So good. I've got a quote here from Dugin, where he's talking about what to do instead of this monotonicity. He says, instead of modernization and growth, we need the direction of balance, adaptability, and harmony. Instead of moving upward and forward, we must adapt to that which exists, to understand where we are and to harmonize socio-political processes. And, most important, instead of growth, progress, and development, there is life. After all, one is yet to prove that life is linked to growth. This was the myth of the 19th century. Life, in contrast, is connected to eternal return. In the end, even Nietzsche incorporated his idea of the will to power into the concept of eternal return.
Yeah, I think so. There are a few things I'd like to say about that. One, as we've already established that the SJW to Russian nationalist pipeline is very strong, in Dugin demonstrating his SJW ability to call everything racist. This is now the Dugin as woo-woo practitioner, where he loves harmony and life, and I was half expecting him to start talking about vibrational frequencies and SE5s. I also want to talk about like the Nietzsche's eternal recurrence idea.
Do you reckon he has an SE5? Shoves it up his butt.
Dugin?
Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine he does.
SE5. Do you think that the SE5 is actually just a very complicated pegging device? I'm pretty sure it is.
It could be. I mean, the fact that there was a leather strap for the tuning wand.
Tune my male G-spot, Putin. Come over here.
Yeah, the prostate tenderizer attachment for the SE5 made me think that it was actually a very, very strange sex toy.
So you're about, because you've actually read Nietzsche. I haven't, at least not any meaningful amount. And you know a bit more about his eternal return concept.
He seems here. So eternal return, I think it was first in Thus Spake Zarathustra, where Zarathustra starts talking about how he has this door before him, which is the future, and a door behind him, which is the past, and you just keep walking through these two doors and keep looping and live every moment over and over and over and over again. And I think he fleshed out this concept in subsequent books. I, at least, don't take this idea of eternal return as something that is literally true. I don't think Nietzsche was saying you will literally live every moment of your life an infinite number of times. I took it more as an ethical imperative of, okay, you should live your life in such a way that were you forced to repeat it infinitely, you would be happy with it. Whereas Dugin here seems to be taking it as something far more literal than I think it was intended to be.
I think he does whatever the fuck he wants with whatever ideas he wants.
He just does what he wants. Is the ultimate expression of his will.
I also wanted to read out this other quote, which I thought was worth noting, which is only just a little bit further on for there. He says, we must put an end to the antiquated political ideologies and theories. If we have truly rejected Marxism and fascism, then what remains is to reject liberalism. Liberalism is an equally outdated, cruel, misanthropic ideology like the two previous ones. The term liberalism should be equated with the term fascism and communism. Liberalism is responsible for no fewer historical crimes than fascism and communism. It is responsible for slavery, the destruction of the Native Americans in the US, for Hiroshima and Nagasaki, for the aggression in Serbia, Iraq, and Afghanistan, for the devastation and the economic exploitation of millions of people on the planet, and for the ignoble and cynical lies which whitewash this history. This is his full purple hair. Do you reckon he wrote that paragraph before or after going to the hairdressers and getting his eyebrows waxed and his hair dyed purple?
I think this was after he bought his latest see-through purple plastic horn-rimmed glasses and chunky earrings. Yeah, I think he's bald. Maybe he just has a purple beard. So the thing is, this is...
Yeah, he's bald. Yeah. Purple beard.
He's big purple beard. The thing is, the difference between fascism, liberalism, and communism... Well, there are quite a few differences, but fascism and communism error-corrected pretty poorly in that there were significant abuses under those systems, and those were almost design features. Like
they were intentional. They were extremely intentional. That's what they wanted.
Yeah, practitioners of communism, when they were exterminating kulaks in the Soviet Union... It's not like someone went, oh, actually, maybe we shouldn't be doing this and should stop. No, that was a design feature. That was meant to happen.
Yeah.
In the case of liberalism, like, terrible things have been done by liberal societies. However, I would say almost invariably those things, for example, slavery, were just completely in violation of liberal principles. Like,
and
it was
subsequently
profoundly hypocritical. But those weren't design features of liberalism, and they actually were error corrected.
And presumably, we will continue. Like, maybe there are things that we're doing now that I don't know about that are like really abhorrent and transgressive against those principles. And perhaps if we live in a functioning liberal society, those will be uncovered and corrected as well. But that doesn't mean that they didn't happen. Like, colonization, I think, is one of the deep scars that, like, really, like, the sort of multi-century hangover of that chapter of history from, like, coming out of Europe for, like, people who had some, like, very advanced ideas around, like, creating knowledge and that sort of stuff. For people from those societies to, like, mount colonization on other parts of the world is like, that still happened, but that also doesn't negate that, like, those are also the same societies that were like, oh, actually, like, we fucked up.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't.
It might have taken them 200 years or something, or however long it took. But eventually, people started going like, this is pretty hypocritical, guys. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know, whatever. But then again, that's monotonic thinking. So what he's
not pointing out here is really, the error correction capacity is, I think, a major point of distinction between fascism, communism, and liberalism.
Yeah, and
so communism is an extremely ossified ideology in that, basically, for all their talk about being post-religion and opposing religion and loving rationality and science, they really take Marx to be a prophetic figure. Like, they'll read Capital.
Oh, it is a prophecy.
Almost in an exegetical sense. They read it as a religious text and try to work out how to apply the words of the prophet to situations. For example, like the information economy in the West in the 21st century, which Marx didn't talk about. How do we apply the words of the prophet exegetically to these conditions, which are just contrary to how he predicted history would happen? It's such an ossified ideology that it can't error correct. Similarly, like fascism didn't live for very long. But even during its short life, it didn't error correct. And Dugin just totally misses this point.
Yeah, I wonder if he it doesn't seem why is this the case? It doesn't seem as though any of the authoritarian writers that we've read have dealt with the error correction problem. Am I misrepresenting the people that we've read? Has one of them figured out a way to do error correction outside of liberalism?
Certainly that's, at least to my mind, one of, if not the most potent features of liberalism. Well, if we have read something, I can't remember having read somebody from an authoritarian point of view, like, account for error correction. Mm.
It seems to be something where, like, the people just assume that they're doing the right thing and there is no space for error correction because they're not in error.
Yeah, well, there is a tension between authoritarianism and that form of self-critical error correction in that it presupposes that you're going to make mistakes, which itself doesn't totally undermine the idea of authoritarianism. Because you could say, well, the authoritarian is the one best capable of acting to correct those mistakes through their own individual judgment.
That would be a slight
it at
one.
least throws up obstacles to the idea of authoritarianism.
Yeah, I suppose it would degrade
because
the
it acknowledges their
illusion.
fallibility.
Yeah, exactly. Like the fallibility of the demagogue would actually like undermine what they're trying to do, or even if it's perceived fallibility, like the risk of perceived fallibility or weakness or whatever. Should we do the reversibility of time and then call it a night?
Yeah. So the weird thing about Dugin's view of time, apparently he wrote an entire book on time, so he probably fleshes it out a bit more there. Yeah. The issue is that he doesn't explain where he's getting these ideas of time from. I have a few theories, but they could well be wrong. So I'll read out a quote to start this off. Time is a social phenomenon. Its structures don't depend upon object characters, but upon the domination of social paradigms, because the object is assigned by society itself. In modern society, time is seen as irreversible, progressive, and unidirectional. But this is not necessarily true inside societies that do not accept modernity. In some societies without a strict modern conception of time, cyclic and even regressive conceptions of time exist. Therefore, political history is considered in the topography of plural conceptions of time for the fourth political theory. There are as many conceptions of time as there are societies. So he does a sneaky Dugin here, where
Sneaky Dugin.
to begin his discussion of time, a sneaky little Dugin, where he says, okay, I'm talking about the conceptions of time. However, as the book progresses, he stops talking about conceptions of time and just starts talking about time. Now, if I'm going to be very generous, I'd say Dugin loves himself some Heidegger. And maybe he's saying, okay, well, the conception of time, your phenomenology is, in a significant sense, reflected in your ontology, in your being, and maybe the two aren't even separable. Therefore, your conception of time and time itself are the same. So if time is just this social construct, then any discussion of time is actually just a reference to an individual or a person or a society's conception of time subjectively. Therefore, so-called objective time is just a reflection of one society's subjective time. I think that's what he's doing here.
So I'll read out another quick quote. He says like, the fourth political theory reconstructs society behind modern axioms. That's why the elements of the different political forms can be used in the fourth political theory without any connection to timescale. There are no stages and no epochs, only concepts and preconcepts. It says there's basically like no topography of objective historical time. There's no such thing. If time is historical, it cannot be objective. Dasein says the same. Dasein is the subject of the fourth political theory. And then he goes on to say, time is a political category. Political time is a preconcept of a political form. Yeah, so this is what I alluded to earlier in the episode when I said chronological relativism. So his relativism goes all the way to the point of like within a particular, say, ethnos or state or whatever. If they have a different conception of time, then because he's a phenomenologist, he's like, well, that is in fact what the time is for them. And there's another part. Well, I guess maybe we can move on to the ontology of the future, because that the stuff about time was just like a couple of pages before I think his real thing that he's saying in the ontology of the future. He makes this really weird point where he's like and correct me if I'm mistaken, Jack, but two political groups, polities or I don't know, ethnoses or whatever, could interact with one another, but their times. Let's see if I've got the actual quote, but their times will not interact. Something like that. Do you remember reading that part? I'll see if I can find the quote.
I felt that this was mostly part of his broader point that because different ethnoses can have different subjectivities or impose different structures of subjectivity upon the people living within them, and because one's subjectivity ultimately gives rise to their being or is the foundation of their being, therefore they're ontologically different and can't understand each other. So they might be able to understand certain things that they have in common, but their conceptions of time could be different, and therefore their actual times are different. At this point in our recording, life intervened. We had to stop and pick up this thread on another day. So, expect another Dugin episode in the future, where we will finish discussing the fourth political theory. See you next time.